I don't think it's by any means a hot take to say that superheroes are no longer perceived by the general masses as the exclusive domain of nerds as they were a decade or two ago. Nowadays, the idea of superheroes in the comic book genre are a lucrative concept that yield large consumer interest, which should be obvious by virtue of the fact that most of the biggest movies of all time are superhero properties. As much as people like to talk about superhero fatigue and how comic book movies will eventually die out, I don't really see it happening. The genre has existed for over a decade now, and studios are beginning to find more and more ways to keep the superhero genre fresh while still being approachable to vast demographics. But when a genre becomes so big, you begin to get deconstructions and critiques of it. 'Tis the nature of art. Comic books and superheroes have been around for longer than most people living on this earth currently, so postmodern deconstructions of the comic book genre have existed for a while now. But never before have they become as prevalent as they are today. They all tend to ask the same question, or at least some variation of it. What if superheroes were real? Despite this idea being as original as the hero's journey, I still find its execution very interesting. Depending on the artist, this idea could be done either very well or very poorly. And given the recent airing of The Boys Season 2, I figured now's as good a time as any to talk about this theme and how it's executed across all these different projects. At its foundation, the idea of a superhuman brings up a lot of interesting questions of, can a being of godly power be a protector of humanity? Should they exist outside the law? How would they operate within a government? Are people that wear masks and fight crime insane by virtue of how ludicrous or impossible their goals are? Now, the idea of superheroes existing in reality isn't exactly groundbreaking. A 12-year-old with a basic grasp on reality could comprehend that Superman couldn't function in the real world the same way as he does in the realm of comics. Unimaginable power creating a disconnect between the superhuman and those he's meant to protect has existed since God created the first humans. But what can be fresh is how these interpretations translate to the current culture, politics, and societal consensus about superhero media. It's no secret that almost every one of these "what if superheroes were real" stories is in some way derivative of the work of Alan Moore, specifically Watchmen. When writing Watchmen, Alan Moore sought to make a book which would hold a dark mirror to the genre he had started to become sick of. He wanted to show how all these heroic archetypes would function if they existed in our world, warts and all, and the reality is that they're silly at best and psychotic at worst. In Alan Moore's mind, if you dress up in a suit to fight crime despite it not accomplishing anything aside from giving a couple of criminals black eyes, are you really making the world a better place? Or is parading around as a superhero and beating people up a way to compensate for impotence and lack of confidence? Is someone who is all-powerful and capable of the impossible really a human who has our best interests at heart? Does being a superhuman make you inherently a good protector of humanity if you are no longer human? And is someone that goes around en masse beating people up and dispensing vigilante justice through intimidation and fear a hero? Or is he a psychopath? I know I'm probably just regurgitating the same wisecrack drivel you've heard 1,000 times about this book, but I don't think it can be understated how influential and original this book was.
It was so easy to have an effect, because the majority of the writers and artists who'd come before us had never thought of challenging any of these assumptions regarding the superhero genre.
Despite writers doing the opposite of what Alan Moore wanted and trying to trap the lightning in a bottle, the ideas Moore put forth in his book still stand out and are unique despite every superhero book after Watchmen trying to ape its success. I think one of the things that works best about Watchmen that most other "what if superheroes were real" stories don't understand when trying to replicate it is that Watchmen gets comics. Alan Moore sought to show what superheroes would be like in a world similar to our own. He did not, however, seek to make something that would differentiate itself from comics as much as possible. Moore made Watchmen to critique the superhero genre, while still trying to show everything the medium of comics is capable of. Obviously Dr. Manhattan could never happen, obviously Owlman's ship couldn't fly, and obviously a giant fucking squid could not exist in our world. It's a comic book world with goofy shit in it, but it's also a world where a hero can be racist and get checked into a mental ward. It's a world where heroes eventually realize the stupidity of their goals and turn to extreme and morally questionable actions to try and achieve peace. And to be clear, Watchmen isn't necessarily saying that superheroes are inherently bad or that you're a horrible person for liking the fantasy of the superhuman. The book ends with Dan and Laurie rediscovering the fantasy and thrill of being superheroes, even though they both know it does nothing in the long run despite what reality and reason would dictate. We all need a little fantasy in our lives, and superheroes provide that escapism. I feel like I'm rambling on inanely about Watchmen, spouting points and analysis that you've probably heard about a million times before, but for the sake of my point, I'm afraid that a bit of needless rambling rambling is required every now and then. Point being, Watchmen was the catalyst for the what if superheroes were real trope. The particular parts of Watchmen's narrative that have been recycled and distilled are: all powerful superhumans are gods that aren't capable of being protectors of humanity. Sometimes superheroes are crazy, and super people can be dicks.
My heroes are still innocent, you know? My heroes didn't fucking, you know, lie to America. My heroes didn't, you know, embezzle money from their my heroes didn't fucking commit any atrocities. I'm like, that's cool, but you're living in a fucking dream world.
I think every bad example of this trope is made by this man. To some of you, that may be a controversial statement to make. Recently, he's been revered as some genius filmmaker whose movie about a rock alien beating up the Flash will change the superhero genre. Don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a bad filmmaker per se. I think he's got a good sense for visual style and his work radiates personality. But me personally, I think he's a pretentious douchebag who believes his own hype too much. You only have to take a quick glance at his filmography to realize that Snyder loves comic books and superheroes, or at least the idea of them. In particular Watchmen, so much so that he even made an adaptation of it. I'm not going to waste my breath or this video's length talking about his Watchmen adaptation because A, the points I would make when talking about Watchmen could easily be applied to the rest of his filmography, and B, I like to potentially cover the Watchmen film at a later date and I don't feel like making points that would later be regurgitated in that video. I want to talk about Batman v Superman and Man of Steel and why they're bad examples of the what if superheroes were real trope. First of all, I think it was incredibly stupid for Snyder to use already established characters to criticize the superhero genre in an incredibly dark story. Man of Steel and BVS attempt to recontextualize Superman as a Christ-like figure or some kind of religious symbol, and when you look at certain parts of Superman's origin, it's not difficult to see why Snyder wanted to go in this direction with the character. Both Christ and Superman are beings from another world, are sent down to Earth to be raised by a human couple, and are gifted with incredible abilities to try and help the people they were sent down to protect. It's all very biblical, and I think the potential of this idea could be done interestingly. And from my understanding, stories like All-Star Superman explored this idea very well. However, there were a couple of problems with Snyder's approach, and it ties into his love for Watchmen. Snyder wanted his Superman to be one that's distant and detached from humanity, and one that questions whether he has a responsibility to humanity or not, like everybody's favourite blue exhibitionist. There's a few errors in this. For one, Snyder doesn't seem to understand the character of Superman. I don't really read a lot of comics, and I especially don't read Superman comics, but from all the media featuring him that I've absorbed since I was a boy, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp of the character, and I think it's fair for me to say that Snyder is not playing to Superman's strengths. A consistent character trait across various iterations of the character is that he's a Boy Scout, someone who always tries to be good and follow the rules. Sometimes it's presented as a flaw, or it's presented as what makes him the symbol of hope. In my opinion, it would have been more fitting with Superman's character to make him a benevolent kind of god, someone who tries to help people through being compassionate. Secondly, I don't see why Superman would feel detached from humanity. He was raised by a human couple on Earth, and that's the only world he knew. My guess is that Snyder liked how Dr. Manhattan was a bit of a dick who was on a godlike level and could not comprehend humans anymore. But that doesn't apply to Superman. Dr. Manhattan can see the past, present, and the future all at once. He can see a relationship ending before it's even started, and due to the fact that he can do anything, from changing the brightness of his body to creating life, existence has no challenge. All Superman can do is shoot lasers out of his eyes and punch people really, really hard. And is Superman really the appropriate venue to explore Christ allegories in a metaphor of an uncaring god? The counter I could see to my point here would be to use The Dark Knight Returns as a rebuttal, as that book was a deconstruction of Batman and took him in a direction that hadn't been done with the character before. He went from being a silly, campy superhero to a brutal fascist soldier in a one-man war against crime. The Dark Knight Returns is what I would consider to be a milder version of What If Superheroes Were Real. The book is set in a semi-grounded universe where it doesn't shy away from the worst of society, and real-world conflicts and politics are a part of its narrative, so I would say it counts. I got a bit sidetracked there, but my reasoning as to why applying a darker and more realistic interpretation to The Dark Knight Returns works more than Man of Steel is that Batman is a character that's inherently more suited for dark, grounded, and morally grey stories. Ignore the fact that in the years before the creation of The Dark Knight Returns, Batman was seen as an incredibly goofy character. When you look at his origin and what he is, you get a lot of stuff that is the perfect material for a gothic character study. He lost his parents in a violent mugging right in front of his eyes when he was 8 years old. His symbol is based off a childhood fear, and all his villains are insane or in some way psychologically or physically scarred. You can do a lot of interesting stuff with that. Maybe the death of his parents fucked him up and the Bruce Wayne identity died, leading to Batman being born. Is he in any way better than his villains? Are they dark reflections of his psychology? And why does he let the Joker live? The Dark Knight Returns explores all these ideas, and it does it in a way that doesn't compromise the core of the character. Superman is an inherently goofy concept. Is a character like that really the appropriate venue to portray 9/11? When Alan Moore was first developing the idea for Watchmen, he was initially going to use already established DC characters like The Question for Rorschach, Blue Beetle for Nite-Owl, and Captain Atom for Dr. Manhattan, instead of using his own original characters. I feel as though it's fair for me to say the book would have suffered if they used those characters. Amazon Prime's The Boys is the most current and what I would consider to be the best recent iteration of what if superheroes were real. And on the surface it does the kind of thing Zack Snyder was trying to do, show just how fucking terrifying superheroes would be in the real world. But unlike Man of Steel or Batman v Superman, The Boys uses analogues for the characters they're satirizing. Superman is Homelander, The Flash is A-Train, and The Deep is Aquaman. I think when making stories with subject matter like The Boys, using analogues instead of the actual characters is an absolute must. Imagine seeing a show where Superman is a violent, psychopathic rapist, or where the Flash is a drug addict and Aquaman is a sex offender. These characters are viewed as little magnets you put on your fridge, and a lot of people still see them as a kid's property, so applying such a vulgar interpretation to them is just laughable. Creating your own characters in place of what you're trying to parody will always be more rewarding. The Boys, and to a much lesser extent the original comic by Garth Ennis, is centered around superheroes existing in the modern world and being horrible people. No surprise there. What The Boys does that's interesting though is that it adapts the concept and builds its world around the current landscape of superhero media. As I said at the beginning of the video, superheroes are no longer restricted to the medium of comic books. They're everywhere, from movies to video games. And The Boys is acutely aware of how tied to the entertainment industry superheroes are. You still have your typical tropes associated with stories which put super people in the modern world, but there's also a bunch of cool new stuff added to the mix due to the show making superheroes the equivalent of celebrities in their world. Because yeah, superheroes would be shitty people if they exist in our world because of their unchecked power. And similarly, celebrities have unchecked wealth that let them do whatever they want without hardly any repercussions. The Boys merges the two and satirizes the glorification of superheroes in the media, with each hero's face being plastered on pointless products and boiling down content to be as safe as non-controversial as possible. Despite the fact that the trope has been recycled for decades, The Boys found a way to innovate on the potential of applying superheroes to reality in a way that wasn't derivative of previous works like Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns. You still have things that are somewhat derivative, but they've all been given a new coat of paint. Homelander is more than just edgy Superman. He's a multifaceted character that has his own reasons for acting how he does beyond just being a generic evil superhero. I could go more in depth about The Boys and how it satirizes the superhero genre, but something tells me this video's length is going to way surpass what I initially intended it to be, and I prefer to wait until all of the second season is out before I could fully analyze it as a complete narrative. So to try and sell you on the illusion that I had a general idea about what the conclusion of this video would be, applying the idea of superheroes to reality when creating a piece of art in the genre has high risk and high reward. At best, you can provide a contemplative and fresh take on a genre that is incredibly guilty for producing factory products with formulaic plots by breaking the mold, and at worst you can create things that are either incredibly pretentious or lacking in substance or thought. There are still so many other things I didn't cover for this video that fall under the umbrella of this trope, but that's a video for another day, I guess. So thank you all for watching. I'm juggling other projects right now that will hopefully come out on some kind of consistent basis, which I hope you all will enjoy. Have a nice day.